Hi everyone, hope you're having a great day. I decided to make a video today, just a little talking head video, because Michelle and I at the moment, we're not actually traveling. We're back home in Australia, and we probably won't be traveling for a month or so. So what I wanted to do, rather than stop, and I have been lazy, I know I haven't put up any videos during the whole of January, and I've still got some work to edit. I was going to do those, but I've kind of lost my mojo on YouTube. So what I thought I'd do is make a little video diary, have a chat with you all, and let's maybe sort of during this next month or so, just have a talk, let you know what I'm up to, what I'm doing, and share with you some topical stuff from around the world, maybe what's in the news. Not that I actually watch the news. Maybe even discuss things like that, why I don't watch the news, how long ago I stopped using TV or mainstream news, as it were. This might be a good time to tell a little story, actually. When I was about 21, 22 years old maybe, had a good friend. He actually worked for me in a company, or I was his boss technically, but he was 82 years old, gentleman called George, no longer with us sadly, but George used to say to me, we lived in a fairly small town, and he would say to me, I don't like to go out at night. I always lock my door, and I don't like to go out at night because there's so many muggings and so many, terrible things happening. And this would be in the sort of 80s, I think, mid 80s. And so I said to him, George, I said, that's really an unfortunate way to be living, because to me that seemed to not really reflect the world that we lived in. And so I would say to George, I think you're being very affected by what you're watching on TV, George, because think about it, the small town that we live in, how many people have you heard of within our town who have been mugged at night? And he said, well, nobody. I said, but how many people have you heard in our town ever that have been mugged at night? And he said, well, nobody at all, but it's all over the place, it's terrible. I said, George, it really isn't. And the fact that you're living your life reflected on something that you've watched in the news, it seems quite sad. I mean, there is always a risk. I'm not going to say nobody's ever going to get mugged or something, but this gentleman, he's 82 years old, and he's living in fear of being mugged in a town, almost a village really, where the crime rate is very low. But because he's seeing it, he's turning the TV on and watching the news every day, and all he's seeing is that somebody's been mugged in Venezuela on Hip Dog Street in Venezuela, or because the news it searches for bad news. It searches it out wherever it is. So you're going to hear about every earthquake, doesn't matter whether it's in your neighborhood. You're going to hear about every storm, every killing, anything that goes on. So if you were to actually use that as your gateway to the world, you're going to think the world is in a dreadful place. If you turn off your news, I mean, an example, recently somebody said to me there was an earthquake in Turkey, and we were in Turkey all during the lockdown, so I do have a connection with it, but I knew nothing about it. Now, a lot of you might say, well, that's not really good, Steve, you're not aware of world affairs, but what use is it to me to be fearful of an earthquake in Turkey, or what benefit is it for every single person on the planet to know there was an earthquake in Turkey? And I mean everywhere, from Fiji to Chile to Australia. What use is it for everybody to know, other than it keeps people in a heightened sense of fear? And you might say, well, I don't want to travel, there's earthquakes, people getting killed all over the world. So you might, another sort of maybe a macro example of a micro problem. So going back to George, I used to say to him, George, nobody in our town has been attacked on the street or mugged. And I think there was a thing at the time in the newspaper. I think somebody in one of the cities somewhere in the country had been attacked, but even at that time in my very early 20s, I never used to enjoy the news programs. I felt they were always a bit doom and gloom. So I turned on the news that evening and I started sort of thinking about it as I was watching it. And it would sort of start with somebody had died, there was a tragedy somewhere, a shooting somewhere, and dreadful storms that sort of, knocked down a tree in sort of such and such. And I thought, well, that's the only thing that delivered. That's the only thing the news delivered to me today. And I really started to wash my hands of watching the news because I don't think it had a positive effect. And that was in my very early 20s. So I stopped. I stopped looking at newspapers. Not that I particularly was a great newspaper reader, but I stopped looking at newspapers, stopped looking at news. Why did I start talking about that? Michelle's over there. I can ask her. Why did I start talking about that, Michelle?
Oh, you said that you would talk about. We talk about news around the world. We can discuss it. Not that I watch the news. That's how it came about.
Yeah. So I'm looking for a topic or something. So basically, don't tell me to comment on a dreadful bus that fell off a cliff in Argentina, because much as I'm very sad that a bus fell off a cliff in Argentina, I don't think those stories should be part of our local vernacular or discussions, because although there was actually an earthquake and very sadly a lot of people died, or potentially a lot of people died, you never can tell. And I'll give you another example of why that's true. When we were living in Hong Kong many years ago, we had friends and family call us because they'd seen on the news that there was a dreadful storm and somebody had got washed down a culvert, a sort of storm drain, that the storms were so high in the water and the flooding was so bad. And we were sat in our home in Hong Kong, the sun was out, it's a beautiful day, and we're thinking, no, hadn't heard about it, wasn't even on the local news in Hong Kong, but the international news needed that bad news story. So we said, and they were friends and family were ringing us and saying, "Are you okay?" And we're saying, "Of course we're okay. It's beautiful. What's wrong?" They said, "Oh, it's dreadful." It was one street. It was one street in Hong Kong that had some flooding, and I think one person who was not harmed in any way got washed down a drain. So, what I'm getting at. And I keep going off. Do you know where I was, Michelle?
Don't keep asking me.
You better pay attention, because I'll have no idea where I'm going. So what I was saying is, although sad as it was, there was an earthquake in Turkey, and I think also in Syria, so northern Syria and Turkey. I can guarantee you, if you were to search, if you could find it, that there was probably a pretty awful earthquake somewhere in sort of Chile or Nicaragua, or somewhere in Africa, or somewhere else around the world, somewhere in Central Asia, Mid-Asia, Eastern Asia, China even. So there's almost always something going on. Now, the fact that the news decided to focus on that, and it was a larger event than many, is just that it needed that story to feed people, to make everybody fear. And some people won't travel. I think this is where I was going with this. Some people will choose, well, I can't go and travel. Because dreadful things are happening all over the world. But when you're out in the world and you're away from your sort of your idiot box, as I like to refer to it, and you can't see. Imagine George, for example. Imagine George had no television and no newspaper, and he came to work every day, and I met with him and we talked, and he said, "Oh, it's beautiful today. The weather's great," and saw Sam down the street and said hello, and tonight I'm going to have something. I'm going to pick something up from the butcher's. We're going to have a nice meal with my friends and family. And that was the only point of reference that he had. And I said to George, isn't the world a dreadful place? He would have said to me, "Not really. I don't know what you're on about." So you see, it was the fact that George had this doom and gloom sort of information piped into his living room every night, made him react and live the way he did. So if I had anything to sort of say to people, turn off your news. Don't turn off you don't have to turn off me, for example, because I'll talk some sense to you. But turn off the news that is sent to you by decade after decade of psychological testing. And I don't mean that they're doing it in order to sort of manipulate us, but they found over the years these stories sell. And you need to get away from that, because if you have a corporation who puts out a happy story and a sad story, and they get 50 views on a sad story and 1,000 views on 50 views on a happy story and 1,000 on a sad story, the next day they'll put up 2 happy stories and 1 sad story, and they'll get 100 views, 50 each on the happy story and 1,000 again on the sad, and they'll say, okay, this isn't working, let's put 2 sads up and 1 happy. So they put 2 sads up and 1 happy, they get 2,000 views and 50 views, and eventually the happy stories just drop off the radar altogether, and it's sad, 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 sad. Now they're not doing it through any sort of nefarious means to try and make us unhappy. It's just the fact of what happens. Now you can move yourself out of that pond. You can move yourself out of that pond and become a person who's less affected by these corporations who need to sell stories. Because, as a species, as a human race, we do not actually need these objects in our life. We can tell if we walk down the street and there's like dog crap on the pavement and a flower on the left. You might prefer to complain about the dog crap rather than sort of like, muse about the beauty of the flower, and eventually you might sort of be one of those people walking around constantly complaining about dog crap and never seeing the flowers. We can choose which realm we want to be in, but it's better to be affected by a little bit of dog crap on the pavement and flowers, because quite often there are far more flowers than there ever is dog crap in the pavement. There are far more good things in the world than there are bad things, and the more you surround yourself by by the flowers rather than the occasional dog crap on the pavement, the better you'll feel in yourself. Does that make any sense? So what I'm saying is, corporate news is basically dog crap on the pavement, and they want lots of it there to keep you angry and unhappy. Get it out of your life. Now, this was meant to be a talk today about what Michelle and I were up to, and it's gone off on a tangent. I may not put this video up, but maybe I will put it up just so you can see how my brain works, because everything we've discussed in this episode today was not thought about at the beginning. So there's an unplanned episode. I hope you're having a beautiful time wherever you are in the world. Turn off the idiot box. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Be good.